Hello and welcome to Foreign Policy Focus, Episode 10. I am the show's host, Kyle, and it's pretty exciting that I'm up to Episode 10 now of Foreign Policy Focus, so if you're somebody who listens to the show and enjoys it, I ask you to share the show with your friends. I say, hey man, you should check out this pretty cool foreign policy show. So if you like it and you could do that for me, that'd be great. We have a ton of news today, so I'm just going to jump right in it. I'm going to start the show today with talks between Russia and the U.S. NATO and Russia had high-level talks for the first time since 2014. This is pretty big and exciting news here, and good news, unlike usually what I have to give you guys. The talks, didn't reach any conclusion, and there wasn't any big news coming from the talks, but the fact that they occurred is a good sign. Talks between the U.S. and Russia have not happened since Crimea left Ukraine for Russia in 2014. The whole situation that ended the U.S. and Russian talks started in 2014 during the Summer Olympics when the U.S. organized a coup in Ukraine, and the U.S. took out the popularly elected Ukrainian leader and put in place a U.S. selected Ukrainian prime minister. The old leader of Ukraine was somebody who, was a little bit more friendly with Russia and wasn't interested in joining NATO. And the new leader of Ukraine was somebody who was more open to deals with the EU and more open to joining NATO. The new leader of the Ukraine also was somebody who wanted to take away the Russian military base that was in Crimea. So the people of Crimea are, by and large, a Russian-speaking population and wanted friendlier relations with Russia and saw themselves more as a Russian population than a European population. And so with the actions of the new prime minister, the people of Crimea decided to hold a referendum and voted to leave Ukraine, and then later asked to join the Russian Federation, which Russia accepted. When that happened, the U.S. and the U.S. media really blew it into Russia just stole Crimea from Ukraine, which isn't what happened. As I detailed before, the people of Crimea did not want to be a part of Ukraine because the U.S. organized a coup in Ukraine and got rid of the leader there that the people of Ukraine were fond of, and put in place a leader in Ukraine who was going to heighten tensions with Russia, which the people of Ukraine didn't like, and also was somebody that the people of Crimea didn't support. So they vote to leave and join Russia. It wasn't that Russia went and invaded Crimea or anything like that. The people wanted to leave. And so, while you'll still hear on the media that Russia stole Crimea from Ukraine, this simply isn't what happened. And once that happened, the NATO and the U.S. really cut off talks with Russia, and that's when a lot of Obama's sanctions on Russia started going into place, and tensions between the U.S. and Russia really heightened. We have a lot more U.S. troops and NATO troops going on to the border with Russia. We have some troops in Poland that are only 85 miles from the Russian border. We have troops in Estonia and Lithuania, which border Russia. And so it's really a situation where if you're Russia, you're going to feel threatened because not only are you surrounded by U.S. bases, U.S. missiles, the U.S. has a lot of missile defense systems around Russia and troops around Russia. And so if you're Russia, you maybe are feeling like U.S. is moving closer and closer to first strike capabilities. If the U.S. would have first strike capabilities, what that would basically mean is that we would be able to take out all of Russia's real weaponry before they were able to respond. So we would be able to get rid of all of Russia's nukes, all their main military weapons. And while we would still obviously have some kind of war with Russia, there wouldn't be really any threat to the U.S. mainland or Europe from Russia because most of their military capabilities would be destroyed. And so during the Cold War, we always had this policy of mutually assured destruction, which meant that if one country attacked the other country, if the U.S. attacked Russia, Russia would always have a chance to respond. And so the U.S. would never attack Russia because Washington, D.C. would be nuked. Even if the U.S. were to win the nuclear war, D.C. would still be nuked, and it would be a pretty terrible situation in both countries. However, with the U.S. moving closer and closer to first strike capabilities, that may not be the case, and then Russia would feel more and more threatened because Washington wouldn't have the deterrent of Washington will also be attacked if Russia's attacked. And so that's why the balance of power, and the U.S. and NATO are really moving close to destroying that balance and obtaining first strike capabilities. And so maybe we'll see some backing down between the two countries if talks can resume. However, this may be unlikely because of the political game that the Democrats and U.S. media are playing. I'm going to quote a little bit from the Politics Behind Russiagate. This is an article published in Consortium News by Robert Perry. The article details how the Democrats and the U.S. media and even the neoconservative Republicans have really worked against Trump to create a lot of fear and a lot of ideas in the American people that Trump somehow has all these underground connections to Putin. This really all got underway during the 2016 elections when the emails started coming out, the Podesta and DNC emails from WikiLeaks. The Clinton campaign and the DNC really tried to convince the American people that Russia had hacked their servers and then given the emails to WikiLeaks. However, this hasn't been proven. The DNC won't even let the FBI look at their servers to determine if Russia had these emails. There's absolutely no proof that even if, which didn't happen, but if Russia had hacked these emails and given them to WikiLeaks, there's absolutely no evidence that Trump or the Trump campaign had any idea that this was going on or was organizing this behind the scenes like some people have tried to suggest. However, we know from the awesome reporting of some people like Gareth Porter and some analysis from William Binney and Ray McGovern that this simply didn't happen. We have Craig Murray, who is a former UK ambassador who now works with WikiLeaks, telling us that he had met with the source who leaked the DNC emails and that this was a leak, it wasn't a hack. It seems that this person who leaked the emails, we don't know who it is, but this person was upset that the DNC had pretty much rigged the DNC primary against Bernie Sanders to give it to Hillary Clinton. So he then gives those emails to WikiLeaks in order to kind of get back at the DNC. There's some speculation on to where the Podesta emails came from. Some people speculate that they may have come from within inside the FBI or intelligence agencies after Hillary Clinton wasn't brought up on charges for using the private email servers. A lot of people within the FBI felt like Hillary Clinton got away with one and this may have been a way to retaliate. Either way, we have William Binney, who formerly worked with the NSA and was really the architect of a lot of their spying capabilities, who informed us that if Russia did hack the DNC and Podesta emails, did hack those servers, then there would be a trail that would lead back to Russia, and the NSA would know that. All the data that the NSA collects on the American people, which was revealed to us by Edward Snowden, proves to us that if Russia did hack the DNC and Podesta servers, that we would know that Russia did it, and the NSA would have that proof. However, when the intelligence report came out, I believe in January or maybe December, that said, and when that intelligence report came out, that detailed, the case against Russia for hacking the emails, the NSA only had a moderate degree of confidence that Russia had those emails. If Russia had the emails, the NSA would absolutely know 100% for sure that Russia had the emails. And if the NSA doesn't have proof that Russia had the emails, then Russia didn't have the emails, because if they did, the NSA would have proof. And so we're left with, being only able to conclude that Russia obviously didn't have those emails, that they were leaks given to WikiLeaks, and that's how that came about. Another part of this Russiagate story is that General Flynn had talks with the Russian ambassador and violated the Logan Act prior to Trump taking office. So, we have a situation here where even if what the media and their wildest fantasies are saying is true, that Flynn had communications with the Russian ambassador and indicated that maybe the Trump administration would lift some sanctions on Russia after Trump took power. What's the big deal here? I mean, this is just, trying to cut down on tensions between the two countries that Obama has been ramping up by putting troops on the Russian border, and Obama kicking, the Russian envoy out of the U.S. and kind of cracking down on sanctions. And so if that were the case, well, that would still not be that bad of a thing. As an American, I'm glad if Russia and the U.S. could get involved. However, what happened was that Flynn had just mentioned to the Russian ambassador that the Trump administration would be reviewing what the Obama administration was doing, which it is common sense, right? I mean, the Russians have to know that Trump isn't going to just take everything that Obama put in front of him. Trump is obviously going to review all these things. And so the media just really blows this story out of proportion, making it sound like the Trump administration was having like covert talks with Russia and making all these agreements while Obama was still in power. Wasn't happening at all. don't need to worry about it, nothing going on there. And now we have all these Trump officials who are meeting with all these Russian officials. A lot of this is just crap, I guess is the best way to describe it. I mean, these are all very high-level people in the United States, and so, of course, high-level people in the United States meet with high-level people from Russia. That's kind of how it works when two countries have diplomatic relations. And so, you know, the media is really just blowing this all out of proportion. They never really asked for evidence. You know, you have the Trump dossier that came out that was a whole bunch of fake news about Donald Trump. And, you know, none of it verified, but it came out attached to a CIA report. And so, you know, the media suddenly thinks it carries some weight, and it really, again, just adds to this whole thing. So the reason why this is important is that it's pushing Trump to take a more hostile approach towards Russia. Trump needs political capital to get the bills he wants passed. And one of his bigger, you know, I think he's more focused on domestic policy than Russia policy. Trump would rather build the wall than get along with Putin. I think everything that we know about Trump suggests that this is absolutely true. And we're even seeing this because some Trump officials came out and said that Trump is going to backtrack on his promise to make deals with Russia. And so while this isn't a huge deal and nothing to be too concerned about, that Trump isn't going to make the deals with Russia, although it's really disappointing because this was the one thing that Trump said he was going to do that I was a little bit excited about. But the risk is that they're going to push Trump into taking a more hawkish approach on Russia, not just a neutral approach. Friendly's better, neutral's okay, hawkish is bad. Trump isn't exactly a guy known for his nuance or diplomatic capabilities. I mean, this was one of the critiques of Trump all along, right? And so the Democrats are pushing Trump to take a more hardline, hostile approach towards Russia. And if Trump miscalculates or does something stupid, which Trump is absolutely known and prone to do, then we could have a situation with the international crisis on our hands, all because the Democrats wanted to score some political points against Trump on fake news, and the media pushed the story for God knows what reason. So this is all very unfortunate and dangerous for the U.S. people. It amazes me that the Democrats are so willing to, you know, heighten tensions between the U.S. and Russia when they're all environmentalists who are worried about the environment and everything. If you want something bad for the environment, look what would happen if there was nuclear war between the U.S. and Russia. I mean, this would eliminate the environment, not just you know, be a little global warming our carbon in the air. I mean, we're talking about major nuclear war if these are the two big nuclear superpowers, right? And so this is just a risk that the American people really shouldn't be willing to take. And the one decent thing that Trump was going to do, the Democrats are preventing him from doing it. It's really unfortunate, and it's really a sad story. And so hopefully eventually this story will pass and people will realize that there's nothing here and that the media has just been building up a story. I mean, it's gotten to the point where this is so ridiculous, where you have people like Thomas Friedman comparing the alleged Russian hacking in the Democratic emails to Pearl Harbor and 9/11, or you have him going on Morning Joe and saying that this is a 9/11 scale event. It's simply not true. This isn't a 9/11 scale event. All the emails that were leaked about Hillary Clinton were true emails. So if anything, and even if Russia did hack and leak the emails, all they would be doing is giving the American people information about one of the people running for president. Insanity, people. Insanity. And we need to get the media to stop creating fake news about this story. Moving on to Yemen, where Trump certainly isn't good on this point at all. We have, I believe it was Friday of last week, where we have 20 some odd missiles launched against Yemen. These were mostly in the mountainous regions against what were labeled as Al-Qaeda targets. Of course, I don't think the U.S. drone program knows exactly who they hit because they haven't released any names or anything. They just said 2 people were killed riding a motorcycle, and they just assumed that those people were terrorists. No investigation or justice for these people will ever be carried out, and we're just going to assume that they're guilty. And this is part of Trump expanding his war against Al-Qaeda in Yemen. It seems like Trump is going to follow the recommendation of the U.S. general saying that we need more war in Yemen. Some of the more recent drone strikes have expanded not just from the mountainous regions of Yemen, but into the towns and villages in Yemen. And some civilian targets have been hit and some civilians have been wounded. With the situation in Yemen, being wounded is a pretty big deal since there's not a lot of medical supplies left in the country, not a lot of food. And so if you're injured and can't work, maybe you're probably going to die of starvation, or maybe somebody in your family will die of starvation. And, if a wound gets affected, antibiotics probably aren't too prevalent in the country thanks to the Saudi blockade of the country. So, you could easily die from what would be a treatable wound in all other places. Here again, I really want to criticize the U.S. media for what they've been doing in Yemen. So almost every news story I read about Yemen coming from any mainstream news source in the United States will always mention, just kind of on an off comment, the Houthis who took over the capital city of Yemen and most of northern Yemen are usually just passively mentioned in these articles as being proxies of Iran. Simply untrue. They'll mention that Iran has shipped a bunch of weapons to Yemen. This isn't true. Most of these stories have been debunked. There may be some trickle of weapons coming through the border with Oman into Yemen to the Houthis from the Iranians, but it certainly isn't a large amount of weapons by any means. There's not a lot of coverage on what the Saudis are doing to Yemen, and it'll always be framed in the proxy war debate between Saudi Arabia and Iraq, and never that Saudi Arabia is blockading Yemen and bombing Yemen, making it impossible for food and medical supplies to reach Yemen, and essentially starving and killing the people of Yemen for really no good reason other than the fact that the Saudis don't like the Houthis and rather see somebody else in power, even though it seems more and more like the Houthis have some popular support when it comes to the situation in Yemen. The U.S. media also never mentions that Saudi Arabia attacking the Houthis is allowing Al-Qaeda to spread in the country. The Houthis are main enemies of Al-Qaeda, and if the Houthis aren't busy dealing with the Saudi mercenaries in the country and the Hadi army and the Saudi airstrikes and the Saudi blockade, maybe they could focus on fighting the Al-Qaeda troops a little bit more. I have to imagine that if the U.S. wasn't backing Saudi Arabia, then there either would be a resolution to this conflict where the Houthis and South Yemen may be split, or the Houthis would simply have won the civil war by this point and the war would be over, and, food could get to Yemen and people could stop starving, and people, with diabetes could stop dying because they can't get to their dialysis treatments or have any insulin. But this simply isn't what's going on. The Saudi Arabia is propping up the small Yemeni forces that are still loyal to the government and allowing those forces to fight the Houthis, while Al-Qaeda reigns and surges in the country as well. And so the U.S. media coverage of the war in Yemen has been atrocious. Most of the time, if any coverage comes about, it's about stories where they're able to demonize Iran for Iran supporting the Houthis, when Iran doesn't even support the Houthis. Every article coming out of U.S. media always says that the Houthis are a proxy of Iran, which I said again and again is simply untrue. There's no evidence to support this. The Houthis haven't listened to any of the Iranian recommendations. The Houthis aren't even Shia Muslims. They're kind of their own sect anyways. And so this has really created a circus in Yemen where nobody in the U.S. knows or understands what's going on there. But the Yemeni people are starving and Al-Qaeda is thriving. And it's really creating a situation that's going to be very dangerous for America, because with the U.S. support for the Saudi war against Yemen, anti-Americanism is on the increase in the country because America is supporting Saudi Arabia and starving and bombing the country. And with Al-Qaeda rising in power and spreading, it's going to be dangerous for American citizens. So if we want to be safe, we have to demand that Trump stop bombing Yemen and stop supporting the Saudis in their bombing war against the country, because it's absolutely ridiculous. Alright, moving on to Mosul now. Reports coming from Mosul at the end of last week said we had about 30,000 displaced people, and that we are now adding about 10,000 people a day to that number. Camps for these people are already starting to fill up, so it's going to become a very dangerous situation where you could have people starving and, dying out in the desert there. We have an article coming out from Patrick Coburn that really details what may happen as ISIS loses power in Mosul. There's a lot of risk that as ISIS becomes less and less of a threat, all the coalition that's held together by their hatred of ISIS, that hatred may start to diminish a little bit, because, once ISIS is only holding on to one or two neighborhoods in West Mosul, do the Kurds maybe think the Sunnis are more dangerous at that point, or do the Sunnis maybe think the Shia are more dangerous than ISIS at that point, and factions start to turn on each other? So we'll see what happens there. what happens in the aftermath of Mosul. It's also been detailed that there's an awful lot of foreign fighters in West Mosul, and that these people won't be able to blend in with the civilian population and kind of sneak out of the country that way. So we're probably going to have a situation in West Mosul where ISIS is really fighting down to the last man, and there's really going to be no giving up or surrendering because there's no way out of Mosul for ISIS, and so it's probably going to be a long and bloody battle there. The coalition against ISIS continues to make some progress. They've already captured 2 of the bridges that link East and West Mosul, and I guess they have a plan where they're going to take some pontoons that the U.S. government gave them to repair the damaged bridges. And so that may speed up the fight a little bit. In Iraq, we had an interesting conflict between 2 Kurdish factions, the PKK and the Peshmerga. The PKK is more of a Turkish group, and the Peshmerga are Iraqi Kurds, and they came into conflict and started shooting and fighting with each other. There were casualties on both sides. A 24-hour ceasefire was negotiated, and I'm not sure what happened after that ceasefire yet, but it'll be something to keep our eye on if the Kurdish forces start fighting each other, and this might kind of be what we're already talking about, what Patrick Coburn was talking about coming out of Mosul, is that ISIS weakens, the coalition to fight ISIS might start turning on each other. We have government numbers coming out detailing how many civilians have been killed by the U.S. coalition against ISIS. The U.S. government says that 21 civilians were killed between November and January, and this would make the total 220 overall. However, as always, the government numbers are extremely low and probably wrong. Air Wars already has the number of total civilians killed by the U.S. coalition since the start at 2,463. Air Wars does a really good job of documenting all these numbers, so if you don't believe it, check it out at airwars.com, and they'll really detail and show you how the U.S. has killed all these civilians, and the U.S. coalition has killed all these civilians in Iraq and Syria. Syrian news, we have Tulsi Gabbard coming out again and calling for the U.S. to stop arming jihadists. It's amazing how hard it is to get the U.S. people to demand to their representatives to stop giving weapons to Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda is the main enemy of the American people. They're the ones that hate America and want to blow things up in America. And yet you have the U.S. government giving those people weapons to fight Assad, who's never done anything really to the American people. So this is an outrage, and hopefully Tulsi will make some noise and get this to stop. I know that the CIA program was paused around the time that Trump took office, but that may have been restarted. The CIA program was the program where they were giving weapons to Syrian rebels, including jihadist groups like Al-Qaeda. Sometimes those weapons were going straight to the Al-Qaeda linked groups. Other times they were going to people who would rather make a quick buck than actually fight the Assad government, so those people would just put the weapons on the black market and they would be immediately bought up by Al-Qaeda or ISIS. We also have a Syrian plane getting shot down by a rebel group. I don't believe the plane was shot down by one of the missile launchers that the U.S. gave them, so that may be a good thing. However, the plane was shot down near the border with Turkey, and I believe Turkey captured the pilot. So it'll be interesting to see what happens as we have a kind of a standoff in Manbij, where Turkey wants to take the city from the Kurds. However, the Kurds have negotiated a deal with Russia and Syria to where the Syrian army is now around the city, creating a buffer between the Turks and the Kurds. And since Turkey and Syria have a ceasefire right now, they're not attacking each other, but we may see the Syrian government maybe backstab the Kurds here or something to get the fighter pilot back. It'll be an interesting story to keep their eye on. Last story I want to talk about today is we have our first drone strike in Pakistan, carried out by the Trump administration. This brings the total number of countries that Trump has dropped bombs into 5, still short of Obama 7. However, he's only a month or so in, so he has plenty of time to catch up, unfortunately. The strike hit 2 people riding a motorcycle. They said that this was a pretty high-ranking member of the Afghani Taliban that was killed. Yeah, but still dropping bombs in countries all over the world. Don't really have any perspective on the past 16 years at all to realize that every time we drop a bomb, we seem to create 3 more terrorists, because there's thousands and thousands of more terrorists today than there were on 9/11 2001. We have maybe a few hundred Al-Qaeda members back then. Now we have thousands of ISIS and thousands of Al-Qaeda and all kinds of jihadist groups all over the place, thanks to U.S. interventionism and blowing everybody up all over the world. We keep creating more terrorists. So yeah, we need to demand that we stop doing these crazy things. All right, that'll wrap up my show for today. If you like the show, please share it. That'd be very helpful. If you like what I'm doing here, check out my website, kylesfilesblog.com. Files is spelled F-Y-L-E-S. I do a daily news roundup there so you can keep up on all the new information coming out of U.S. domestic policy and foreign policy like I highlight on this show. You can check me out, thelibertarianinstitute.org. You can follow me on Twitter at KYAAALE. Subscribe to the show on iTunes, give me a rating and a review, that would be great. And join the Facebook group, Foreign Policy Focus, same name as the podcast. So if that's something you're interested in, go to Facebook, search Foreign Policy Focus, I'll get you approved to the group. Thanks everybody, see you on Wednesday.